My girlfriend texted, "I am moving in with my professor to focus on my studies. Don't be insecure." I replied, "Good luck with that." Then, I forwarded her text to his wife, along with the apartment lease she had asked me to co-sign. Her career opportunity vanished within 48 hours. The message hit my phone at exactly 12:30. 7 post-meridium on a Thursday. I was sitting alone in a small, windowless booth downstairs from my corporate accounting office, chewing slowly on a mediocre turkey sandwich. The sandwich was supposed to represent a brief, dependable respite, a calculated 20-minute period of solitude. Everything about my life, from the spreadsheets I managed to the routines I kept, was built on stability and prediction. That text vaporized it all. I read the screen. "Hey babe, slept. So I have been thinking and I have decided to move in with Dr. Peterson for a while. It is purely academic. He is mentoring me on my thesis, and this will help me focus. His guest house is perfect for studying. Don't be insecure about this. It is a career opportunity. Love you." I read the 9-word first sentence 4 times. The lukewarm fluorescent light of the deli reflected off the screen as my brain stalled. My 25-year-old girlfriend, Cynthia, whom I had dated for 2.5 years, had just sent me the most stunningly delusional piece of communication I had ever received. Purely academic. Don't be insecure. For 6 months, Dr. Peterson, 48, married, salt and pepper hair, and what Cynthia called distinguished energy, had been a growing static in our relationship. It started subtly. Late night, emergency consultations that somehow required a new dress, dinners to discuss her research that stretched past midnight, weekend conferences that only the two of them ever seemed to attend. I had tried to bring it up twice. Both times, I was met with the same condescending defense that made me feel like a paranoid fool. He is a professor. He is married. He has kids practically my age. You are being absolutely ridiculous, and honestly kind of insulting, Edward. My greatest fear, the shadow from an old, raw wound, was exploitation. I had learned the hard way that when you mix deep trust with high stakes, you often end up financially or emotionally burned. So I stopped fighting the feeling. I stopped arguing out loud and started watching instead. I noticed the angling of her phone when she texted, the expensive cologne that wasn't mine when she came home from study sessions, and the wine bar receipts that backed up the academic discussions. But 3 days before this text, she had introduced an even bigger variable. She had asked me to co-sign a lease for her. It was supposedly a great studio apartment near campus, designed to help her finish her master's thesis in peace. She claimed her credit score wasn't strong enough. The rent was $850 a month. I told her I needed time to think about it. Signing a lease is not a passive act, it is a financial commitment that anchors your credit to someone else's stability. It was the one piece of information I had asked, for that gave me pause, given the vague nature of her life lately. Now, slept. She was announcing she was moving into a professor's guest house, while simultaneously asking me to legally guarantee an $850 monthly payment on a separate apartment. Something was not just wrong. It was aggressively, mathematically wrong. I put down the half-eaten sandwich. The quiet rage I felt was not hot, explosive anger. It was ice, cold, methodical, and rooted in the realization that she had planned to use me as a financial shield. My protective shell, the need for vigilance, was validated in the worst possible way. I typed back 5 words, a small, passive bomb. Good luck with that. The investigation started immediately. The lease agreement was still in my email. attached as a digital document waiting for my signature. I opened it and focused on the property address. I spent the next 20 minutes on the county assessor's website. It is public information, designed to be dry and transparent. What I found made the hair on my arms stand up. The studio near campus was a 2-bedroom condo in a much nicer part of town. And the owners, Dr. Peterson and his wife, Cynthia, was not moving into a guest house. She was asking me to co-sign a lease on an investment property owned by the man she was sleeping with. I would be legally responsible for the rent while the money went directly back into his pocket, effectively subsidizing their affair if their relationship failed. The sheer audacity of the scheme was an engineering marvel of betrayal. My mind raced through the scenario. If they broke up, she would default, and I, the legal co-signer, would be financially on the hook, saving them from a messy lawsuit while she played the victim. The cold calculation was aimed right at my deepest wound. The decision was easy, driven purely by self-preservation. I found Helen Peterson, the wife, on LinkedIn, a hospital administrator, professional, established. Her work email was easily found through the hospital's public directory. I composed the email factual, concise, apologetic, and completely without drama. I attached the text messages and the apartment lease. I hit send. My fate, and theirs, was sealed. I blocked Cynthia's number, tossed the forgotten sandwich, and walked back upstairs. The slow, heavy silence of the office felt like the calm before a devastating hurricane. I had just refused to be the safety net, and now I would wait for the inevitable collapse. The immediate aftermath of the email was a strange, suspended animation. I had unleashed a torrent of consequences on 3 lives, including my own, yet here I was, back in my cubicle, staring at columns of figures that now seemed utterly meaningless. I spent Friday morning in a state of hyper-vigilance, my body running on cold adrenaline. The logical part of my brain kept running the scenario. The lease confirmed the financial fraud. Therefore, my action was justified self-defense. The emotional part kept asking, what if I broke up an innocent family? That old wound. The fear of being the one who misjudges, who causes collateral damage, gnawed at me. The silence from Cynthia was the most unnerving thing. She was blocked, yes, but I expected a frantic email to my work address or an escalation via a mutual friend. Instead, nothing. Just the lull hum of the office air conditioning and the rhythmic click of my keyboard, feigning productivity. Then, at 2:20 post-meridian, an email appeared in my personal inbox. The subject line was simply, Rev information regarding Dr. Peterson. It was from Helen Peterson. I felt a dizzying wave of nausea as I clicked it open. I braced myself for hysterics, for legal threats, for a demand for more information or proof. Instead, I found a short, professional paragraph. Mr. Reynolds, thank you for bringing this to my attention. I appreciate your honesty, and I am sorry you are dealing with this situation as well. Helen Peterson. That was it. No drama. No questions. Just a dignified acknowledgement of the terrible truth. It was a tactical victory. Her composure, her immediate belief in the hard evidence I provided, completely validated my cold, methodical approach. She was handling a devastating, personal blow with the professionalism of a high-level administrator. The woman was facing the destruction of her 22-year marriage, and her first response was to process the data and respond efficiently. I genuinely admired that steel spine. But outside of that one brief anchor of reality, the chaos was beginning to swirl. I started seeing increasingly frantic activity on my other accounts. I hadn't blocked Cynthia on everything, just her main number. My Instagram DMs were lighting up, a slow motion breakdown playing out in text. The messages started with denial and anger. "You are completely overreacting. We need to talk." Then came the pathetic attempts at normalcy. "This does not have to change anything between us. Lol." The 3 letters, LOL, struck me as the most surreal element of the whole ordeal. She was treating the revelation of a massive betrayal and financial manipulation as a silly misunderstanding, a minor speed bump. She truly believed her entitlement had no limits. By the time I left the office, the urgency in her messages was spiking. I decided to make spaghetti carbonara that evening. When life is spiraling out of control, you crave comfort food, something simple and fundamentally good. The process was therapeutic, the careful rendering of the guanciale, the whisking of the egg yolk and cheese, the precise timing of the pasta water. Control where I could have it. The aroma of savory pork and sharp, pecorino cheese filled my apartment. I was draining the pasta when I heard a familiar, small sound, the metallic click of a key in the deadbolt. My blood ran cold. I had completely forgotten to change the locks. A massive, stupid oversight born of shock. Cynthia burst through the door. She wasn't crying yet, but she was shaking with pure, unrestrained fury. Her face was flush crimson, her eyes wide and wild. She hadn't bothered to take off her jacket, and she looked like a hurricane had just dressed her. She walked past the little table I used for my keys and threw her purse onto the kitchen counter with a loud, aggressive thump. "What did you do?" Her voice was a low, tight hiss. I looked down at the steaming pasta I was about to sauce. "Pasta. Want some?" I kept my back to her, meticulously stirring the sauce. The mundane action was a shield. "You contacted his wife? Do you have any idea what you have done?" "Informed her that her husband is sleeping with his graduate student, and that the 2 of you tried to rope me into signing a lease on their private investment property." "Yes. I think I understand what I did. We were not sleeping together. It was mentorship, academic collaboration," she insisted, her voice breaking on the lie. I turned around slowly, the wooden spatula in my hand. I looked at her, not with anger, but with the flat, clinical disappointment reserved for a failed experiment. "You were moving into an apartment he owns. You asked me to co-sign the lease, so I would be financially responsible if you defaulted. Slept. You told me not to be insecure about you literally living with a married man." I paused, letting the cold reality of the facts settle in the warm, savory air of the kitchen. Pick a story and stick with it. Pick a story and stick with it. The phrase hung between us, heavy with the scent of garlic and pecorino cheese. The spatula felt strangely powerful in my hand, a conductor's baton pointing out the flaws in her performance. Cynthia's face crumpled immediately. The fury vanished, replaced by a sudden, theatrical collapse into tears. It was an instant switch from attack mode to victim mode. Ugly crying. Mascara started streaming down her cheeks. Black streaks marking the trajectory of her hysteria. The hiccuping sobs sounded forced, yet loud enough to rattle the cheap glass on the kitchen counter. "You have ruined everything," she wailed, stumbling a step back. "His wife is making him cut all contact with me. I might lose my thesis advisor. My entire academic career could be over. Because you could not handle your jealousy." I set the wooden spatula down carefully on the stove, next to the pot of steaming pasta. I refused to let my hands or my voice shake. "Sounds like consequences," I stated plainly. That line infuriated her more than any shout could have. "How can you be so cold about this, Edward?" I crossed my arms. This was the moment where I needed to articulate the truth I had spent months trying to avoid. You tried to use me as a financial backup plan while you moved in with another man, a married man with children. You lied to my face for months about the nature of your relationship. And when I finally figured out what was happening, your response was, "Don't be insecure." I stepped closer, forcing her to look up at my face. So yes, I am cold right now. I am ice cold because I realized the person I spent 2.5 years with was building an escape route, made entirely out of my credit score and trust. You need to leave your key on the counter and get out of my apartment. She switched tactics again, going instantly from raging victim to wounded lover. Her voice softened, dropping to a breathy whisper. She wiped at her face clumsily and took a slow, deliberate step toward me. Baby, I made a mistake. I got confused. He was paying attention to me, making me feel special about my work, telling me I was brilliant. Your work, right? I asked, refusing to let her close the distance. Is that what we are calling it now? Nothing physical happened. I swear on my mother's life. She pleaded, her eyes wide. I genuinely do not care if it did or didn't at this point. I countered. The intent was clearly there. The lies were definitely there. The attempt to financially trap me was absolutely there. We are done. This relationship is over. The nuclear option was activated. She started screaming again, high, pitched, and completely uncontrolled. She accused me of being controlling, pathetic, and jealous. She said I was threatened by her intelligence and her connection with someone who actually appreciated her mind. It was classic Darva Dini. Attack, reverse victim, and offender. She was trying to flip the script one last time, making my rational response to her financial fraud and infidelity the actual crime. I just stood there with my arms crossed, letting the tirade wash over me. I had already made the decision. Her theatrics were irrelevant noise. When her voice finally started to go hoarse, and she ran out of breath, I simply repeated the command. K. Counter. Door. Pick an order, with a sound somewhere between a sob and a snarl. She snatched the spare key from her purse. She threw it at my head. It missed by about 2 feet, clanging harmlessly against the stainless steel refrigerator door. She stormed toward the door, pulling it open with brutal force and slamming it hard enough to make the pictures on my hallway wall rattle precariously. The silence that followed was complete, broken only by the low hiss of the gas burner. Underneath the carbonara, I stood in the wreckage of the confrontation for a long moment, the scent of expensive colonial fighting, with the savory smell of my dinner. My hands were shaking now, finally releasing the tension. The apartment felt impossibly quiet and suddenly vast. The next morning, I called a locksmith. It cost me $180 for a Saturday call-out fee, but every penny was worth it. The old key mechanism was removed and replaced, symbolically and literally sealing the door against her return. The physical action of changing the locks was the first real step in rebuilding the security she had tried to demolish. The relationship was over, but I knew, watching the locksmith work, that the fallout was just beginning. The problem was out in the open, and she was going to fight the consequences every step of the way. The weekend that followed the confrontation was deceptively quiet. The immediate physical threat was gone, replaced by a tense, nervous waiting. I changed the locks, cleaned the kitchen, and threw out the leftovers of the carbonara. The scent had become inextricably linked to the betrayal. It was the calm before the next wave, and I knew, from my experience with the financial wound, that things never end cleanly They always metastasize. The first sign of the escalation came late Sunday afternoon. I was folding laundry, one of those small, repetitive tasks I used for grounding, when I heard a polite but firm knock on the door. I checked the peephole. It was Cynthia's mother. I had met the woman maybe 4 times in 2.5 years. She had the typical suburban mom energy. A little too nice. Always bringing cookies to family dinners. Seeing her on my doorstep now, looking pinched and serious, confirmed that Cynthia was resorting to using family leverage. I opened the door, leaning against the frame to signal casual control, blocking any easy access. "Ma'am," I greeted her flatly. "Edward, we need to talk about what you did to my daughter." I did not invite her in. "What a did? You humiliated her. You could have handled this like an adult privately, but instead, you went to that man's wife and destroyed my daughter's entire academic future. Out of spite." Her voice was tight with anger, but underneath, I could hear a fragile defensive panic. I straightened up, adopting the same clinical tone I used when discussing leveraged buyouts. "Mom slept. Your daughter was having an affair with a married man and tried to get me to sign a lease on his property without telling me who owned it. That is borderline fraud. I did not destroy anything. I just turned the lights on." She fell back onto Cynthia's lie, desperate to maintain the narrative. "She says nothing physical happened between them. Then she has absolutely nothing to worry about, right?" I pressed, maintaining eye contact. "If it was all innocent academic mentorship, like she claims, I am sure the university investigation will clear everything right up." The effect of that sentence was immediate and dramatic. Her face went completely white, draining of all color. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked as though I had just confirmed her house was actively burning down. "What investigation?" she finally managed to whisper. "Ah." So Cynthia hadn't told her parents that crucial detail. Interesting. The fallout was even more explosive than I had imagined. "The one his wife apparently reported to the Title IX office," I explained calmly. "Something about inappropriate relationships between faculty and graduate students. There is a whole university policy about it. Apparently, they take it pretty seriously." I could see the gears turning in her mind, the realization dawning that this wasn't just a breakup, it was a professional and legal crisis. She looked past me into my tidy apartment, then back at me, her eyes filled with fear and anger. She opened her mouth as if to protest again, but seemed to lose all momentum. She turned on her heel and walked silently back to her car, looking utterly defeated. The conversation with her mother gave me 2 important pieces of information. First, Cynthia was controlling the flow of information to her family, minimizing her own culpability. And second, the professor's wife, Helen, was moving with impressive speed and precision. The professor's wife reached out 3 days later. She didn't email. She called my personal number, which she must have found on one of the lease documents I forwarded. She apologized for the intrusion but asked if we could meet for coffee. I was hesitant. My goal was surgical removal, not messy entanglement. But her communications had been professional, and I had a genuine respect for her immediate, decisive action. We agreed to meet at a quiet, anonymous coffee shop near my office on Wednesday afternoon. When I arrived, she was already sitting at a small table. Helen was exactly as I pictured her, put together, professionally dressed, and composed. But if you look closely, you could see the strain in her eyes, the dark circles and the tight lines around her mouth. It was The kind of awareness that no amount of sleep can fix. I wanted to thank you properly, she said, after we sat down with our drinks, and apologize for the mess this has caused in your life. You don't need to apologize to me, I told her honestly. You are a victim here, too. Maybe, she conceded, stirring her coffee slowly. But I also stayed willfully blind for longer than I should have. This wasn't his first indiscretion. Just the first one I could not ignore or explain away. She revealed they had been married for 22 years, with 2 kids now in college. She had suspected other students before, but never had concrete, undeniable proof. My email, she said, was the thread that unraveled everything. Once she started pulling, the whole thing came apart fast. The lease was what really got me, she admitted, her voice hardening. The property is in both our names. He was going to move his mistress into our investment condo, and somehow convinced her to get someone else. To guarantee the payments. The layers of deception in that plan alone. She shook her head in disgust. She then shared the final piece of key information. Your girlfriend called me last week, by the way, screaming about how I ruined her life by reporting the relationship to the university. As if I was the one who made all the choices she made. That sounds about right for her, honestly. She also threatened to sue me for defamation. I had my lawyer send her a very detailed letter explaining what defamation actually requires and how truth is an absolute defense. I have not heard from her since. I finished my coffee. Talking to Helen felt like a cleanse. She confirmed my belief that my actions, though drastic, were both justified and necessary. I had found an unlikely and genuinely decent ally in the middle of a war zone. I knew the academic system was slow, but with Helen's evidence and her legal team, the consequences for the professor were certain. The game was far from over, but the major power dynamic had shifted completely. The coffee meeting with Helen had been productive, providing a final layer of confirmation that I was acting against calculated fraud, not just infidelity. Now the battle shifted from defense to endurance. Cynthia could no longer attack me directly since her key was useless, and I was untouchable via text. So, she resorted to the classic technique of emotional manipulators, weaponizing her extended social circle to apply pressure. The first wave came via her brother, a large guy, maybe 6'2", who specialized in physical intimidation rather than forensic accounting. He showed up at my apartment building on a Tuesday evening, buzzing relentlessly until I finally answered the intercom. I know who you are, man, he growled through the speaker. You need to come down. My sister needs the security deposit back from your place. I actually laughed into the intercom. My body had passed through rage and settled into a state of weary, cynical amusement. What security deposit? I asked. He got more aggressive. The one she put down when she moved in with you. She is completely broke right now, and you owe her something. I calmly laid out the facts, refusing to be drawn into the intimidation tactic. Your sister never paid a security deposit. I have lived here alone for 4 years. She is not on my lease. She never paid rent. She never contributed to utilities. There is no security deposit, because she was never officially a tenant. She lied to you too. It seems to be a pattern with her, honestly. He stepped closer to the building's entrance, clearly expecting to intimidate me into opening the door. Look, man. She cannot even afford her rent anymore, because of what you did. You owe her something. I do not owe her a single thing, I stated firmly. And if you do not leave my property in the next 30 seconds, I am calling the cops. He left, but not before punching the wall in the hallway outside my apartment hard enough to leave a small, ugly dent in the drywall. My neighbor across the hall, an older woman who had lived there for decades, opened her door, took in the scene, and immediately offered to be a witness if I needed one. Good neighbors, I thought, were priceless. The second wave was more insidious, aimed directly at my carefully constructed stability. I was called into my manager's office on Thursday afternoon. My manager, a man named Gary, looked profoundly uncomfortable. "Someone contacted Human Resources about you, Edward," he said, avoiding eye contact. "And an arrest of the house plaint, saying you have been harassing a graduate student and interfering with her academic career." My stomach dropped. A cold, sickening sensation of dread. The attempt to destroy my career, the one thing built entirely on transparency and meticulous honesty, sent a jolt of true fear through me. This was directly aimed at my financial lee, the foundation of my safety. "Let me guess," I said, keeping my voice level despite the surging anger. "They didn't leave any details about how I supposedly did this?" "No. Very vague complaint. Just accusations." I took a deep breath. I had to fight fire with paperwork. I explained the whole situation, the relationship, the professor, the infidelity, and the core issue, the signed lease for the property owned by the professor. I pulled up the email exchange, showing him the original lease, and the text where Cynthia told me not to be insecure about moving in with a married man. Gary, to his credit, listened to everything without interrupting or judging. When I finished, the silence stretched out for a full minute. "Edward," he said finally, pushing his chair back, "it sounds like someone is trying to cause problems for you. I am going to document this conversation, attach your evidence, and note that the complaint appears to be retaliatory. Human Resources is not going to do anything with something this vague anyway, especially when it is clearly linked to a domestic dispute." Bullet dodged. But the feeling of being hunted, of having my professional life exposed to the chaos Cynthia created, was deeply unsettling. The lie was protecting me, forcing me to document and be vigilant, but the pressure was immense. The third wave was the most brazenly delusional. I received an actual letter in the mail. Physical mail. Not email. From her father. It was 3 pages, handwritten, a meandering, melodramatic appeal about family values and forgiveness, and how I had destroyed his little girl's dreams. The core demand, buried beneath the emotional fluff, was breathtaking. Slept. He demanded I write a formal apology to the university, clearing her name and stating that I had made up the affair out of jealousy. He wanted me to commit perjury, to protect his daughter from the consequences she had earned. I did not respond. I just kept the letter, tucking it neatly into a file with all the other evidence, just in case I needed it for a harassment complaint later. Every piece of paper was a defense. The last wave attack I had to endure before the consequences caught up with the professor was the worst. My ex-girlfriend herself showed up at my apartment building late one Saturday night. The security camera in the lobby caught her trying to get someone to let her in. When that failed, she sat on the front steps, sobbing loudly for almost an hour, until a neighbor threatened to call the police. She left a letter, addressed to me, slipped under the main door. It was 6 pages of absolute, unvarnished delusion. The highlights included: "You were supposed to support me through everything, not destroy me when things got complicated." And, chillingly, "If you had just signed the lease like I asked, none of this would have happened." The complete, total lack of self-awareness was almost impressive. She genuinely believed she was the victim, and I was the agent of her professional and emotional demise. I documented everything, kept every screenshot, every letter, every time stamp. My resolve was reinforced. I had to keep the wall up until the storm passed. I was still standing, unbowed, but deeply exhausted by the siege. I had to keep the wall up until the storm passed. I was still standing, unbowed, but deeply exhausted by the siege. 2 weeks later, the institutional hammer finally dropped. The siege had ended, and the institutional hammer finally dropped. First, the news about the professor. The university's preliminary review into the Title IX violation was complete, and it was brutal. Helen's action and my documentation had been the catalyst for something much larger. They found a pattern. Cynthia was not Dr. Peterson's first mentee, with suspicious circumstances. There were at least 2 others over the past decade, though those women, understandably, had declined to participate in the full investigation. The professor was suspended pending a full hearing. He wasn't fired yet, but he was removed from the department website. His classes were canceled, and all his graduate students, save for Cynthia, were swiftly reassigned to other faculty members. The academic grapevine was reportedly on fire with gossip. For a man whose entire identity was built on prestige and the structure of the university, this was professional death by slow strangulation. My ex-girlfriend, of course, was in complete academic limbo. The university wouldn't allow her to continue working with him, and finding a new thesis advisor mid-program is a nightmare under normal circumstances. Most faculty do not want to inherit another professor's work, especially not a student wrapped up in a high-profile scandal. The doors to her prestigious planned future were slammed shut. But the real focus returned to the entitlement, which had now reached truly spectacular heights. Having failed to intimidate me with her family, she tried to re-establish emotional leverage, culminating in the pathetic spectacle caught on my lobby camera. The 6-page letter she left under the door was the final, distilled essence of her delusion. I took it upstairs, made myself a cup of tea, and read it with a feeling of clinical detachment. You were supposed to support me through everything, not destroy me when things got complicated, was the opening gambit. It quickly moved to an intellectual justification. The relationship with the professor was about intellectual connection, something you could never understand. The section that chilled me to the bone, though, was the one that attempted to transfer all accountability. If you had just signed the lease like I asked, slept, none of this would have happened. This was the lowest point for me, not because of the danger, but because of the sheer hopelessness of her ever grasping the truth. She genuinely believed that my decision to protect myself was the root cause of her consequences. She concluded with a classic flourish. You have stolen my future, and I will never forgive you for that. I hope you are happy being alone, because no woman will ever love you the way I did. I sat there, holding the pages, absorbing the toxic energy. For a fleeting second, that old wound flared. I thought, did I go too far? Did I use a tactical weapon when a simple breakup knife would have sufficed? The chaos she was experiencing was extreme, and a tiny, almost imperceptible sliver of human sympathy threatened to emerge. But then, the self-talk began, rooted in the lie I had built for survival. I recalled the county records. I saw the professor's name on the deed, and I saw the $850 monthly payment waiting to be attached to my credit score. I saw the months of gaslighting, the forced insecurity, and the cold, calculated attempt to secure a financial safety net while she pursued a higher status relationship. The sympathy vanished. I crumpled the letter and threw it into the recycle bin. The emotional pressure had peaked. I had survived the siege, and the integrity of my self-preservation, my vigilant lie, was intact. Then came the positive update from Helen. We were now grabbing coffee occasionally, an odd but satisfying alliance born of shared victimization. She was meticulously handling her divorce. I have an excellent lawyer, she told me, and the prenup had an infidelity clause. He thought he was untouchable. The consequences were steep. Helen was keeping the house, getting primary custody of their youngest child for college tuition purposes, and taking a significant portion of his retirement accounts. The professor was left with little. He gets the condo, Helen concluded with a wry smile. The one he was going to install your ex-girlfriend in. I thought there was some poetry in that. I agreed. There was definite, beautiful poetry in that outcome. 3 weeks later, the final shoe dropped. The university concluded its formal hearing. The professor was found in violation of multiple policies regarding faculty, student relationships, and abuse of position. He wasn't technically terminated. The university preferred a clean break, but he was given the choice to resign immediately or face formal termination, proceedings that would go on his permanent academic record. He chose resignation. No golden parachute, no emeritus status, just gone. Academic exile. As for Cynthia, her situation stabilized only through abject capitulation. She found a new thesis advisor at a smaller, less prestigious program about 2 hours away from the city. She had to transfer, restart significant portions of her research, and, crucially, her funding was pulled because it was tied to the original professor's grants. She was paying out of pocket now. From what I heard through the neutral friends, she was working at a coffee shop to make ends meet while finishing her degree on a brutally delayed timeline. It wasn't the total destruction she wailed about, but it was a catastrophic failure of the elite, effortless path she had planned. The house of cards had fully collapsed. I was standing firm, while the consequences were precisely, and justly, delivered to the guilty parties. The need for constant vigilance had receded, replaced by a quiet satisfaction. About a month ago, the inevitable, improbable, final encounter occurred. It was a completely random chance meeting, the kind of coincidence you only see in bad movies. I was near my old neighborhood visiting a friend and stopped at a large grocery store for drinks. I was standing near the beer cooler when I saw her. Cynthia was in the checkout line ahead of me. She was wearing practical, faded jeans and a plain, unbranded hoodie. Clothes a million miles away from the designer outfits she used to wear to her academic consultations. Her posture had deflated. The confident, almost arrogant carriage was gone, replaced by a smaller, warier slump. She looked genuinely exhausted. The kind of tired that comes from working minimum wage and commuting 4 hours a day. Before I could back up, turn around, and execute a flawless escape, she saw me. Her eyes widened, and a flicker of the old entitlement flared, quickly subdued by resignation. She finished paying and walked toward me, stopping just a few feet away. "Edward," she said, her voice softer than I remembered, stripped of the usual aggressive veneer. "Can we talk for a minute, please?" Against every piece of rational self-preservation advice I had internalized over the last 6 weeks, I agreed. "Fine. Outside. 5 minutes." I needed to see if the consequences had delivered the truth. We walked out to the parking lot, the asphalt hot beneath the December sun. She started with what I assumed was supposed to be the apology. "I know I messed up badly," she began, fidgeting with the plastic handle of her grocery bag. The whole thing with him, I got lost. He made me feel like I was special, like my work actually mattered, like I was going somewhere important. Your work does matter, Cynthia, I said. That wasn't actually about your work, though. She paused, struggling with that assessment. I know. I know that now. She looked down at her hands. But you didn't have to blow up my entire life like that. You could have just broken up with me quietly. There it was. The final, essential pivot. The absolute inability to accept responsibility for the scale of her actions. The consequences were my fault, not hers. The truth had landed. But the need to be the victim remained intact. I looked her straight in the eye, determined that this was the last time I would ever articulate this defense. I had to make the financial crime, the true betrayal, the focus. You asked me to sign a lease on his property without telling me who owned it. Do you understand what would have happened if I had signed that document? If things went wrong between you two, I would be legally responsible for an $850 monthly payment for an apartment I did not live in, owned by a married man you were sleeping with. You tried to financially trap me as your backup plan. I wasn't trying to trap you, she insisted, her voice rising slightly. I just needed options. Security. You needed a safety net made out of my credit score and bank account while you went off to play house with your married professor. I corrected her, keeping my voice dangerously low. That is not confusion or insecurity. That is cold calculation. That is why I sent the email. She started crying again. Not the theatrical sobbing from my apartment, but a defeated, quiet weeping. I loved you. I still do in some ways. Can't you understand that? You had a really strange way of showing it. I replied honestly. Everything got so complicated so fast. She pleaded. He was going to leave his wife eventually. We had actual plans together. I shook my head. He was never going to leave his wife. Men like that never do. You were convenient until you weren't. She flinched like I had struck her. It was a painful moment, realizing that the one thing she genuinely believed, that she was special enough to break up a 22-year marriage, was also a lie. I just wanted you to know I am genuinely sorry for all of it, she whispered. And I know you won't believe me, but nothing physical happened until the last couple months. Before that, it really was mostly emotional. That honestly does not make it better. I know. She wiped her eyes with her sleeve, a gesture of deep weariness. Do you think you will ever be able to forgive me? I took a moment. I considered the question seriously, giving her the respect she hadn't given me. I had to answer with the truth I had finally earned in therapy. Maybe someday I just won't think about it anymore, I said. That is the most honest answer I can give you. She nodded slowly. It was not the dramatic absolution she wanted, but it was the only honest closure I could offer. We stood there for another few seconds in silence. Two strangers, linked only by the wreckage of her decisions. Then, without another word, we went our separate ways. I haven't seen her since. The chapter was closed. So where does that leave me now? The grocery store encounter was the final period on a messy, painful sentence. I am doing okay. Not great, not terrible, just okay. Therapy has been helping a lot. Turns out being systematically gaslit and manipulated for months does a real number on your ability to trust your own judgment and instincts. I spent a long time looking for hidden meanings in everything, assuming every conversation was a setup, constantly searching for the angle. My therapist calls it hyper-vigilance, which ironically mirrors the lie I built to protect myself. The goal now is to dismantle that rigid defense and rebuild my trust in my own quiet. Initial assessment. The simple, human instinct, without needing the mountain of legal documentation to validate it. I am making solid progress on rebuilding that internal framework. My work life is stable. I got a small promotion last month. Nothing earth-shattering, but it came with a decent raise and a better office with a window. It feels good to be rewarded for transparency and methodical diligence, the opposite of the chaos I escaped. The stability is real, earned through hard work, not stolen or secured through manipulation. Dating. Not yet. I tried one of those apps for about 2 weeks, but I kept overanalyzing every message, looking for the red flags, searching for the co-signing request in the first message. It was not healthy behavior. I deleted the apps. Maybe in a few more months, when I feel more solid and the ghosts of the past have less weight. The need to be happy requires stability, not vigilance, and I am still working on that shift. The professor's story also wrapped up. Last I heard, he took a position at some tiny liberal arts college in the middle of nowhere. Massive pay cut, zero prestige. Basically academic exile for a man who craved status. His ex-wife, Helen, and I still grab coffee occasionally. It is a weird friendship, but she is genuinely good people. She confirms he is bitter about everything, blaming everyone but himself for how things turned out. He still lives by the lie that he was the most important person in the room. My ex-girlfriend is still struggling, according to the mutual friends who stayed neutral. She had to move back in with her parents while she finishes her degree because she could no longer afford rent. The commute to her new, smaller program is brutal. The coffee shop job pays barely above minimum wage. She reportedly complains constantly about how unfair life is and how I destroyed everything she had worked for. A small, residual part of me feels something like sympathy for her struggle. Very small. Then I remember the lease scheme, the months of calculated lies, the gaslighting, and the arrogant "don't be insecure" text, and the feeling passes pretty quickly. She is living with the consequences she earned, and I am not financially responsible for any of it. Some folks asked if I regretted sending that email, if I felt giddy about the professor losing his career, his marriage falling apart, and my ex's academic future getting derailed. Honestly, no, I do not. I did not create this situation. The professor made his choices, repeatedly, for years. My ex made hers, repeatedly, for months. I just refused to be complicit in the consequences. I refused to be the financial safety net, while someone else got the relationship benefits. I refused to keep questioning my own sanity when my instincts were screaming that something was wrong. The wife deserved to know the truth about what was happening in her own marriage. And I deserved to not be used as a financial patsy. That is not revenge. That is just refusing to be a doormat. Although, I won't pretend, watching that whole house of cards collapse in 48 hours was genuinely satisfying on some level. I acted rationally to defend my financial integrity, and the universe provided the poetic justice. I finally learned the truth. My self-worth is not tied to being a protector or a provider for people who deceive me. My job was to save myself. And I did. Time to close this chapter and figure out what comes next.